This is a newspaper, the New York Times, dated August 16, 1971. The headline reads, "Nixon suspends gold standard." The paper is yellowed now, brittle at the edges, preserved in a plastic sleeve. I bought it at an estate sale in Connecticut for $45. Below the headline, a photograph shows President Nixon at a podium, explaining to the American people that the United States would no longer redeem dollars for gold. The decision, he assured the nation, was temporary, a 90-day suspension to address speculation against the dollar. Your dollar will be worth just as much tomorrow as it is today. 55 years later, that newspaper costs $45. The dollar it references has lost 98% of its purchasing power against gold. Nixon's 90-day suspension became permanent within 2 years. The temporary measure became the foundation of the monetary system we've lived under ever since. I keep this newspaper on my desk because it reminds me what temporary means when governments say it, what suspension means when officials announce it, what your dollar will be worth just as much means when the people making promises have every incentive to break them. The reason I'm showing you this newspaper today, the reason it matters right now, in January 2026, is that the playbook Nixon used in 1971 is being executed again. Different names, different circumstances, but the same essential moves, in the same sequence, for the same reasons. If you hold gold, what happened in 1971 is not history, it's a preview. And understanding that preview may be the difference between watching your wealth evaporate and watching it multiply. Here's what they're not telling you. On January 22, 2026, the Treasury Department submitted a classified memorandum to the White House National Economic Council. The memorandum's existence was revealed through a Freedom of Information Act request filed by a financial research organization. The contents remain classified, but the title was disclosed. Options for managing dollar-gold relationship during period of monetary stress. Options for managing the dollar-gold relationship. The phrase would be unremarkable except for one detail. Since 1971, there has been no official dollar-gold relationship. Nixon severed it. The dollar floats freely against gold, determined by market forces, with no government commitment to any exchange rate. Why would Treasury prepare a memorandum about managing a relationship that officially doesn't exist? The answer lies in what's actually happening in gold markets, and what the 1971 Playbook reveals about how governments respond when gold threatens dollar credibility. In 1971, the crisis built for years before Nixon acted. Foreign governments, particularly France under de Gaulle, had been exchanging dollars for gold at the official $35 per ounce rate, draining U.S. gold reserves. The gold window, the mechanism allowing conversion, remained officially open, but the math was becoming impossible. U.S. gold reserves had fallen from 20,000 tons in 1950 to under 10,000 tons by 1971. Foreign dollar claims exceeded remaining gold reserves by a factor of 4. The system was functioning, but doomed. The gold that backed the dollar was leaving faster than policy could address. Something had to give. Nixon chose to close the gold window rather than watch reserves drain to zero. The suspension was presented as protecting America from speculators, but the real purpose was simple: stop the hemorrhaging before the vaults emptied completely. The 2026 parallel is structural, not superficial. Gold is not draining from Treasury vaults. That relationship ended in 1971. But gold is draining from Western market infrastructure at a pace that creates analogous crisis conditions. LBMA vault inventories have declined by 2,847 tons since January 2025, a 34% reduction in 12 months. COMEX registered gold has fallen to 11.2 million ounces, barely covering current delivery obligations. Shanghai Gold Exchange vaults depleted to under 200 tons, triggering delivery delays for the first time in the exchange's history. The gold isn't flowing to foreign governments this time. It's flowing to Eastern markets, private vaults, and sovereign reserves of nations actively building alternatives to dollar-based finance. The mechanism differs, but the pattern matches. Western gold infrastructure is hemorrhaging metal, the flow is accelerating, and the mathematical endpoint, empty vaults, failed deliveries, system seizure, is approaching. The Treasury memorandum suggests policymakers see the parallel. Options for managing the dollar-gold relationship implies they're contemplating interventions that treat gold as a policy variable rather than a market price. The 1971 Playbook is being consulted because the 1971 Playbook addresses exactly this scenario. This is where the lie becomes unsustainable. The official position since 1971 has been that gold is irrelevant to the monetary system, a barbarous relic, in Keynes's phrase, with no role in modern finance. Central banks held gold reserves as a legacy of earlier eras, not as functional monetary backing. The dollar's value derived from America's economic strength, not from metal in vaults. This position was always partially false. Central banks didn't actually sell their gold after 1971. They held it, decade after decade, through every ideological shift and policy evolution. If gold were truly irrelevant, why maintain thousands of tons in sovereign reserves? The position became entirely false after 2008. Central bank gold buying, which had been minimal or negative for decades, reversed sharply. Emerging market central banks began accumulating. China added over 1,000 tons to reported reserves. Russia added over 1,500 tons. The barbarous relic was suddenly in demand among the institutions supposedly most committed to its irrelevance. The 2026 Treasury Memorandum acknowledges what official rhetoric denies. Gold still matters to the dollar. Not because gold backs the dollar officially, but because gold prices signal confidence in the dollar. When gold rises against dollars, it demonstrates that holders prefer metal to currency. When the preference becomes pronounced enough, when gold's rise accelerates beyond what markets consider normal, the signal damages dollar credibility globally. The paper versus physical distinction that defines today's gold market creates policy implications Nixon didn't face. In 1971, gold was gold. The gold leaving U.S. vaults was the same gold arriving in French vaults. The system was unified, with a single price and a single settlement mechanism. In 2026, paper gold and physical gold are diverging markets. Paper trades at $3,150. Physical trades at $4,100 or higher. The premium represents a 30% gap that the 1971 system would have arbitraged immediately, but the 2026 system cannot arbitrage because the metal to arbitrage with doesn't exist in sufficient quantity. The policy options in the Treasury Memorandum presumably address this divergence. How do you manage a dollar-gold relationship when there are two gold prices? Do you target paper gold, which can be manipulated through futures markets but increasingly represents fiction? Do you target physical gold, which reflects reality but cannot be directly controlled through financial mechanisms? Nixon's 1971 solution was simple: end convertibility, stop the drain, let prices float. The solution worked because America still held significant gold reserves. The vaults weren't empty, just emptying. The suspension bought time and changed the rules before the game was lost. A 2026 suspension would apply to a different problem. America isn't bleeding gold reserves. The gold left the building decades ago. What's bleeding is the credibility of paper gold markets, the functionality of Western delivery infrastructure, and the assumption that dollar-denominated gold prices reflect anything real. The suspension in 2026, if it comes, might look like temporary trading halts during market stress. It might look like emergency rules allowing cash settlement instead of physical delivery. It might look like government purchases to support paper gold prices against physical premiums. It might look like restrictions on gold exports, imports, or ownership, measures that echo the 1933 confiscation but update it for modern circumstances. The playbook has pages we haven't seen yet. The pattern suggests they're being prepared. When institutions do what they're doing now, they're not analyzing history. They're positioning for its repetition. At 2:30 p.m. Eastern on January 24, 2026, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York conducted an unscheduled gold operation that would have seemed routine 55 years ago and seems extraordinary today. The operation involved transfer of 47 tons of gold between the New York Fed's vault, which holds gold on behalf of foreign central banks and international institutions, and an undisclosed recipient. The transfer was documented in the Fed's weekly balance sheet supplement, a report read by perhaps a few hundred specialists worldwide. 47 tons is not a trivial amount. It represents approximately $6 billion at current physical prices. The undisclosed recipient and the unscheduled timing raised immediate questions among analysts who track these flows. The New York Fed vault holds approximately 6,000 tons of gold, the majority owned by foreign governments who deposited metal there for safekeeping decades ago. Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and dozens of other nations maintain gold at the New York Fed because, historically, it was the safest, most accessible storage location in the world. But foreign governments have been withdrawing. Germany repatriated 674 tons between 2013 and 2020. The Netherlands repatriated 122 tons in 2014. Austria, Belgium, and other nations have conducted smaller repatriations. The trend is clear. Foreign governments want their gold home. The January 24th transfer may be another repatriation, or it may be something else. Perhaps gold moving to support a policy operation. Perhaps gold being positioned for market intervention. Perhaps gold being deployed in ways the 1971 Playbook would recognize, but 2026 observers can only speculate about. The opacity is intentional. Gold operations are among the least transparent central bank activities. The secrecy that surrounded Nixon's 1971 decision, planned in total confidentiality, announced on a Sunday evening to minimize market reaction, applies equally to whatever options the 2026 Treasury Memorandum contains. Gold holders don't get advance notice when policy changes. They get Sunday evening announcements while markets are closed. They get temporary suspensions that become permanent. They get assurances that their wealth will be worth just as much tomorrow from officials who know those assurances are false. The 1971 Playbook wasn't published until it was executed. The 2026 Playbook won't be either. Less than 60 days likely remain before whatever intervention the Treasury Memorandum contemplates becomes operational. The timing inference comes from the policy cycle. Memoranda submitted in late January typically inform decisions made in Q1, implemented before Easter recess, announced during low-volume trading windows. The seasonality isn't coincidental. Policy interventions affecting markets prefer quiet periods, long weekends, holiday weeks, summer doldrums. The window between now and April contains multiple such periods: President's Day weekend in February, spring break weeks in March, Easter weekend in April. If Treasury is preparing gold market intervention, the implementation window opens within weeks. The gold you hold today operates under current rules. The gold you hold in April may operate under different rules, rules designed to manage a dollar-gold relationship that officially doesn't exist, but clearly concerns policymakers enough to warrant classified memoranda. While American policymakers consult the Nixon Playbook, other nations reference different history. At 9 a.m. Moscow time on January 25th, the Russian Central Bank published its annual reserve management report. The report contained a section on gold that Western analysts flagged immediately. The Russian Federation maintains gold reserves as protection against monetary instability in the international system. Historical experience demonstrates that nations holding substantial gold reserves navigate currency crises more successfully than nations dependent on foreign-denominated assets. The historical experience reference points to Russia's own history, the 1998 ruble crisis, when Russia held minimal gold and suffered catastrophic devaluation, versus 2014 to 2022, when substantial gold reserves helped cushion sanctions and currency pressure. But the reference also points to America's history, specifically 1971. The nation that closed the gold window did so because it lacked sufficient gold to honor its commitments. The nations that accumulated gold afterward, the nations now positioned as creditors rather than debtors, navigate the current system from positions of strength. Russia holds over 2,350 tons of gold. China holds at least 2,264 tons officially, likely much more unofficially. India, Turkey, Poland, and other nations have accumulated aggressively. The BRICS bloc collectively holds gold reserves approaching 8,000 tons, more than the United States' 8,133 tons, and gaining. The accumulation is not ceremonial, it's strategic. These nations studied 1971 and drew conclusions. When the monetary system convulses, gold holders survive. The playbook they're following isn't Nixon's. It's the playbook of nations positioning to benefit when Nixon's playbook runs again. The geopolitical dimension transforms the 1971 comparison from historical analogy to strategic template. In 1971, the nations accumulating gold, primarily France, were American allies operating within the Western financial system. Their accumulation was embarrassing, but not existentially threatening. The post-1971 order emerged with dollar hegemony intact, European allies still committed to Atlantic partnership. In 2026, the nations accumulating gold, China, Russia, the BRICS bloc, are explicitly building alternatives to dollar hegemony. Their accumulation is not embarrassing, but challenging. The post-intervention order, whatever it looks like, will emerge with these nations holding gold and holding leverage. The gold flowing from Western vaults isn't circulating within a closed system. It's exiting the system entirely, entering sovereign reserves in nations that may not return it under any circumstances. The hemorrhage Nixon stopped in 1971 was hemorrhage to allies who would eventually cooperate with dollar management. The hemorrhage occurring in 2026 is hemorrhage to rivals who will not. This asymmetry changes what the playbook can achieve. Nixon's suspension worked because the system remained fundamentally cooperative. America's partners wanted the dollar system to function, even as they exploited its weaknesses. The suspension gave everyone a face-saving exit from an impossible situation. A 2026 intervention cannot assume cooperation. China has no interest in supporting dollar credibility. Russia has every interest in undermining it. The BRICS settlement mechanism being built specifically excludes dollar participation. The suspension or intervention or whatever policy emerges will operate in a system where major players actively benefit from its failure. This is what a system looks like when it runs out of time. The 1971 Nixon shock was a controlled demolition, dangerous, but executed with planning and followed by reconstruction. America's remaining gold reserves, alliance relationships, and economic dominance provided foundations for rebuilding. The 2026 situation offers fewer foundations. Gold reserves haven't grown since 1971. America still holds approximately 8,133 tons, unchanged in decades. Alliance relationships are strained by trade conflicts, security disputes, and diverging interests. Economic dominance is challenged by a China that didn't exist as a meaningful actor in 1971, but now produces more goods than America by most measures. The Playbook's plays remain available, but the field conditions have changed. Running Nixon's plays against 2026's defense may not produce the same results. The trap has no clean exit, because the exit options have different owners. In 1971, America controlled the exit. Closing the gold window was unilateral, requiring no permission or cooperation. America defined the new rules because America's dollar was the only game in town. In 2026, alternatives exist. The yuan-ruble settlement mechanisms Russia and China have developed handle over $200 billion in annual trade without dollar involvement. The BRICS payment system, when fully operational, could handle trillions. The gold-backed settlement instruments under development offer commodity exporters non-dollar options they've never had. The Playbook assumes America can define the new rules as America defined them in 1971. The assumption may be wrong. The nations holding gold, building alternatives, and accumulating leverage may reject rules that don't serve their interests. The negotiation that follows any intervention may produce outcomes America doesn't control. For gold holders, the Playbook's return is both risk and opportunity. The risk is that intervention targeting gold prices impairs the value of holdings. Nixon's 1971 shock was followed by a 15-month period where gold traded sideways, the market adjusting to new rules, participants uncertain about what the rules meant. A 2026 intervention could produce similar confusion, similar sideways action, similar uncertainty. The opportunity is that interventions ultimately fail against fundamental forces. Nixon's suspension was followed by gold rising from $35 to $850 over 9 years, a 2,300% gain. The intervention didn't prevent gold's rise. It delayed it, channeled it, created volatility around it. But the fundamental devaluation of the dollar against gold proceeded regardless of policy. The 2026 fundamentals: paper physical divergence, delivery system failure, Eastern accumulation, Western supply shortage, are stronger than 1971's fundamentals. The intervention, whatever form it takes, will fight these forces. History suggests the forces win, eventually and dramatically. The gold holders who navigated 1971 most successfully were those who understood what the intervention meant and what it didn't. It meant short-term volatility, rule changes, and uncertainty. It didn't mean gold's fundamental value proposition had changed. The holders who sold during the confusion regretted it. The holders who accumulated during the confusion became wealthy. The same framework applies to 2026. The intervention will create confusion. The intervention will not change the arithmetic of dollar debasement, physical scarcity, or global de-dollarization. The holders who understand this difference position accordingly. Those who hold physical gold, metal in their possession, outside the paper system, immune to rule changes affecting exchanges and contracts, are positioned to navigate whatever intervention produces. Their gold remains their gold, regardless of policy announcements. Those who hold paper gold, ETF shares, futures positions, unallocated accounts, face the possibility that intervention targets exactly their exposure. Nixon's 1971 move affected paper claims, dollar convertibility, while physical gold remained privately held. A 2026 move could similarly affect paper claims, while physical holdings persist. The distinction that has defined this entire gold market analysis, paper versus physical, becomes operationally decisive when policy intervention arrives. The intervention will have mechanisms, definitions, and boundaries. Physical gold in private possession is likely to fall outside those boundaries, as it did in 1971. Paper gold in institutional custody is likely to fall inside them. Reality asserts itself through policy interventions that acknowledge what rhetoric denied. The Treasury Memorandum on Managing the Dollar-Gold Relationship admits that the relationship exists, that gold's movement affects dollar credibility, that dollar credibility affects gold's movement, that the two assets remain intertwined despite 55 years of official claims otherwise. The admission is the signal. When governments prepare memoranda about managing relationships they claim don't exist, the relationship exists. When classified options papers address problems officials publicly dismiss, the problems are real. The 1971 Nixon shock taught a generation that governments will act suddenly, unilaterally, and deceptively to protect currency credibility. The lesson has been forgotten by many, but remembered by those who study monetary history. The lesson is being retaught. The playbook is being consulted. The memorandum has been written. The gold holders who understand what's happening have this moment, this brief window before whatever intervention arrives, to position their holdings appropriately, to ensure they hold physical rather than paper, to ensure they hold outside systems that intervention can target, to ensure they understand the difference between short-term volatility and long-term value creation. Nixon's 1971 shock was a shock only to those who weren't paying attention. The signs were visible for years: the gold drain, the foreign accumulation, the mathematical impossibility of maintaining convertibility. Those paying attention positioned before the shock and benefited afterward. The 2026 signs are equally visible: the supply drain, the Eastern accumulation, the mathematical impossibility of maintaining paper-physical convergence. The Treasury Memorandum confirms what the signs suggest. Policy intervention is being prepared. Paying attention now, positioning now, understanding now. These are the actions that separate those who benefit from those who suffer when the playbook runs. The newspaper on my desk shows what happened when Nixon executed his playbook. The president at the podium, the assurances that meant nothing, the temporary measure that became permanent. The newspaper cost me $45. The lesson it teaches is worth considerably more. The 1971 playbook returns in 2026. The signs are visible. The memorandum is written. The intervention is being prepared. The question is not whether history repeats. The question is whether you're positioned correctly when it does. The holders who understood 1971 became the wealthy of the following decade. The holders who understand 2026 may become the same. The playbook is old. The opportunity is new. The window for positioning closes when the next Nixon shock arrives. It arrives soon. The memorandum has already been written. What you do before the announcement determines everything that follows. The 1971 newspaper reminds us: governments act suddenly, deny the significance of their actions, and expect you to believe assurances they know are false. The 2026 memorandum suggests they're about to do it again. Position accordingly.